Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You want to take roll call? Mrs. Lemichuk?
Andrew Benson.
Here.
Katrina Binkowitz.
Here.
Doug Day.
Here.
Joseph Wetmore.
Here.
Edward Levine.
Here. So, I'd like to open the public hearing for the proposed adoption of the updated comprehensive plan. I'll second that.
I just want to say that if you do number 5 tonight, it'll be a great tribute to pass it in Connie's fire station.
That's true.
There's some irony to all this, isn't there?
That's just, I don't know if it's irony, but it's appropriate.
So, is there any more discussion? If not, all in favor?
To close it?
Don't open it.
Oh, to open it.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
All in favor?
All in favor? Aye. Okay, so it's open.
Opposed?
Oh, you mean I spoke too soon?
Yeah, it wasn't quite open.
A bit.
Oh, sorry.
Now would you like to, now that we have a public hearing open, would you like to,
You want me to repeat that?
Would
That's
you
all I
please?
really have to say.
I didn't quite hear you, so what did you say?
It was a great tribute to pass this plan in Connie's fire station.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Any other comments from the public?
I was gonna say, I think some people signed in.
Back there for public?
Hi, Chris.
Hello.
Hi, Chris.
So, yeah, this is a great piece of work, I think. It is really more than a comprehensive plan of what the town is. I think it's it's patriotism on display. It's a benchmark of consensus, and it's a reference point for the town of community participation, and it's a documentation of what the town believes that it stands for. And it's also a vision of transformation. And it's a guide, as we've always said, but it's a guide for change. And it's always troublesome for some people, but change is of the world today. It is the closure of a process. And, it's been this phase, 2 years ongoing with the committee, planning board, the town board input, public input. And towards the end of the process, we start to hear more passionate voices from our community. And it's just like everything else, deadlines produce people coming out and, seeing something final and starting to make their comments on it. So, but sometimes thinking too much about something has an opportunity of losing momentum. And what I urge the board here is not to lose momentum, in a sense that this is a closure of this process in adopting this, but I think there's a more broader sense that has been brought out by this whole process, and that's serving our community. As myself, serving on the comp plan, on the economic development portion, I was engaged in researching other towns' processes, other comp plans, reaching out to the community, talking to other business people, trying to gather input. And I believe all the other members that were on the comp plan were doing the same thing as a conduit in. So in terms of public input, we represent and are liaisons to the town in terms of that. So ongoing community involvement is really, I think, a really important part of the comp plan that really hasn't been talked. We've been talking minutiae and details of wording and just everything being perfect. But if you look in the comp plan, there are 50 plus goals, and there are like 150 recommendations, okay? And so to simply approve the process and then let those goals and recommendations sit aside, and I know that came up in our discussions, that who's going to follow through with these things? I think there has been a number of new faces that have come forward, and I think to engage those people in the process in some sort of, I know there's been talking of forming some other committees or getting them involved myself. I'm on the zoning board. You know, I mean, there's so many things that I would hate to see that momentum lost in the new people that come forward. As a recommendation is every new, things change in the world so rapidly. The new administration that comes in, every supervisor's administration should set up a committee of people to at least review the goals and recommendations and see if we are moving forward towards what we want. And it's about volunteerism. So again, this is a benchmark of consensus. I hope that the board approves the plan unanimously. That will send a strong message to the community that this is part one of this process, and it's going to demonstrate functioning government. One thing I'd like to leave you with, this is my copy of the U.S. Constitution. And in the Constitution, there's a little section on the history of the Constitution and how it was formed. And I'm just going to read you a small portion of this. This was at the Constitutional Convention. No group at the convention got its way, especially not the theorists of government. Senior statesmen warned them that they were going too far, too fast. Local politicians demanded fairness for state interests. And architects of compromise set their ideas aside. Nothing is more fatal to theoretical purity than the spirit of compromise. The convention made a vitally important shift from devising the best constitution possible in theory to devising the best that had a chance to be adopted. And I think that's what we've seen through this whole process is working on both sides, compromise. You know, you may look at government above the town of Lansing and say that it's not this good, it's dysfunctional, and the things are not getting done. I think there's a real opportunity here for things to get done and move forward to more pressing issues that the town needs to look at as we move into the future. So I urge you to unanimously adopt the comprehensive plan.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Does anyone else like to use this opportunity for public comment?
I'd like to note Larry Sharpstein sent us a letter.
I was about to address that. Larry Sharpstein did send all the town board members and supervisors a letter. We'll put it in the packet with the rest of the comments that we have with everyone else. I could read it if you like, but the fact of the matter is I think all the town board members have seen it. So it would be the same thing as if Larry is here since we all have read it. I can read it, but it's entirely up to the town board members. It will be in the record. And more importantly, I think that the town board members have read it, so at least they had time to consider it.
Are people interested in hearing?
That's why, does anyone in the
I mean,
audience?
I'll be happy to do it. It's entirely. Pardon me?
Can you summarize?
You know, I thought about that today, but I really feel uncomfortable paraphrasing
It
or
has some
summarizing.
specifics.
Yes.
It's not terribly long.
Okay, we'll just go ahead and read it.
Go for
Okay.
it.
Okay. Say, dear Mr. Levine, I will be unable to attend the meeting tonight, but I do have a few comments, and I respectfully request that they be read at the meeting, and that this letter is in its entirety to be included in the minutes of the meeting. First, I would like to express the respect and appreciation I have for all the members of the Lansing public, the town board, and the planning board, as well as the town staff for their attention and tireless work during the development of this document. I believe that it is a good document overall and can be used to frame the future land use in the town. Having said that, I do have a few comments about specific items. Number one, page 41. I believe that the word controlling should be reinstated. We must allow for some commercial development, hopefully professional offices, research, and high-tech. The vision that this document puts forth has costs that cannot be adequately supported by taxation of residential and farmland alone, especially with the reduction of our traditionally high tax-based sources. There is ample room for this type of development in areas where infrastructure is already available, and the town has been trying to encourage it there. The second concern is future land use, and in parentheses, and map, page 43. I have long held that the lower portion of this land, specifically the area around the Cuddyback Caves, should be kept from development, preferably as a recreational area. I believe, however, that unless the upper area is taken by the state, and that the town should receive pilot funds to reimburse it for loss of tax revenue, it should be clear that the town recognizes that the current agricultural use is encouraged. I know that the narrative reads that way, but the inclusion of the entire area on the map is confusing and or misleading. People can look at the map and make assumptions without referring to the rest of the document. Number 3, page 44. I feel that the sentence that was stricken should be reinstated and the added portion be kept to supplement the description of the work the town staff already does. Concern number 4, page 47 and 48. I agree that the town must take the lead in making sure that New York State Department, or I should say New York State DEC, and the federal EPA are maintaining due diligence, and that the town should receive records of all pertinent comments by both parties. We do not, however, have the authority or the financial ability to take control of these processes. Also, I think there's a typo on page 48. First full paragraph. Concern number 5, page 64. By striking the acknowledgement that the town does currently work with developers to provide open space and trail connections, the implication is made that this does not currently occur. That is not the case. And I think that doing less than acknowledging current efforts while suggesting that the process should be taken further does a disservice to past efforts of the town. Number 6, page 70, some other locations. Gas and electric service expansion is very important. Calling for just enhancement is a failure. Without access to clean burning gas and clean electrical power, even residential users are limited in the ability to stop using fuel oil for heat and change to cleaner, more efficient gas and electric technologies. Current proposals for housing are endangered by the limitation of electric power available to the town. The same lack of commitment by the utility stands in the way of clean commercial development as noted earlier in this letter. Concern number 7, page 76, goal NR-7. I continue to oppose the development of a CAC for the reasons I have previously stated. The additional cost to the town and delays that the addition of another level of bureaucracy will result in. The same results can be realized by regular citizen input to the planning and town boards during the regular meeting and hearing processes without the additional costs. This document was always intended to be a framework for land use regulations for the next decade. And in general, I think it offers ideas and methods that can successfully do this. I think it is important to note that the best way to present information like this is to avoid accusatory or strident rhetoric. In large, I think that the comprehensive plan accomplishes that. I thank you for the opportunity to make these comments. Sincerely, Larry Sharpston. Are there any other comments that you'd like to make during the public hearing time? And I'll say it one more time. Is there any comments you want to make during the public hearing time? And if not, we have a motion to close the public hearing.
I'll make that motion.
One of us can first and second.
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. Whoever's first and second. Okay, so we have Trina's first and Joe second. Any
All
other
in favor?
Okay. Oh, go ahead.
All in favor?
Aye. So
Opposed?
opposed? Nay. Good. So it's 5-0. Excellent.
I would like to move, listening to Larry's comments very specifically, and I went through them very carefully this afternoon, that his comment about page 64, to add in some of that language back again.
I'm fine with that.
I would start where it says the TOL, but I'd like to spell that out as town of Lansing, because I think that's, just the rest of that section.
Starting at
The town of Lansing has for the last 8 years, and I move that we add that language back into the
Okay.
plan.
I'll second that.
Anyone say more comments?
Also, his comment on page 41.
You want to vote on these individually, or how do you want to do it?
We
Do you
can-
Why don't we do them individually in case
Okay.
there's a question?
Sure.
Okay, so we have the first one, we have the proposal. So the general consensus is, I guess, all in favor?
Yeah,
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so let's move on to the next one.
okay. What was the page again?
41.
41.
The number 1 item.
That was you, right, Katrina?
I personally don't feel that it handicaps the document to have the word as controlling rather than the word that is currently in there.
I actually prefer limiting, because I think that's what we're trying to do, and if you read the seeker thing, we're trying to limit development from going into other areas. And, you know, that's what we say over and over again, the seeker is we're trying to limit the amount of development encroaching into open spaces rather than controlling. So I think I like the word limiting, or I like limiting better than controlling.
I understand the replication of language, but in general, I don't see it as being really any different.
I see
In
that.
intent. I mean, where we're going to affect this is in the actual zoning discussions.
I see the word controlling as a broader definition than limiting. Limiting gives, in my opinion, gives definite restrictions. We're going to limit this amount. Where when you control it, it sounds like you have, once again, just my opinion, you have a wider scope of, okay, what are we controlling? It gives you much more flexibility.
Limiting is more specific.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's fine. I want to make a comment.
So we
Does
have-
anybody have another comment about that?
Any more comments about this? All right, so let's get a consensus on all this stuff before we move forward then, like we agreed, Joe.
So we're leaving that one alone? Number 1, we're leaving it as is now?
We're putting the, well, first of all,
We're putting controlling back in.
We are putting controlling back in?
I proposed
Okay.
reinstating controlling. Joe has expressed the alternate viewpoint. Ed has explained the difference, but I'm not sure which side you came out on.
control. I agree with Katrina's broad brush explanation. Doug?
I have to agree with Larry on this one. I like what he put in there. I think it
Okay.
makes more- I don't like the word controlling, but then again, I'd rather not see limited either.
Okay. So I think we have a general consensus here, not a unanimous, but we have a general consensus that the word controlling should.
What did Andrew think?
Andrew?
I guess I would go with controlling. Limiting just sounds too definite, too, that's it.
Okay. So I think we have a general consensus
Not
of,
controlling, there's more leeway.
All in favor of changing it to controlling?
aye,
Aye.
Nay?
Nay.
okay. Katrina, you had the next one?
I wanted specifically to speak to number 2. I understand, I agree with Larry in the intent, but I believe that our argument for making the whole thing pink was not to change the zoning. And if we were going to make a note actually on the map itself, to say that this is a vision, not a suggested zoning change.
Well, we put that part, again, I wasn't at the meeting, so I didn't get all of
Oh,
your.
that's right.
And Guy tried to help, so we, with Guy's help, we put it in the text of the document. But it's hard to put that type of a note on a map and mean something.
Just can't write it on there.
It's hard to just say, well, maybe yes, maybe no.
I had expressed that I wanted it to stay agricultural, top part.
And I think the
Yeah.
text is pretty clear on
And
that.
I think we all
So if
agree
you
that.
want me to leave it pink, you want me to leave it blue and,
I think the argument for leaving it all pink was a message to the state. If they don't go forward with it, then we can change that map.
Once again, personal opinion, this is specific going conceptual, we should be going conceptual going to specific. Personally, my opinion, we should leave it the way it is because you can work on the specifics later.
I would agree with leaving it the way it
Leave
is
it,
right now.
leave it as it is.
I think the
pink.
text is very clear.
And if any discussion comes up with any developers, we will clarify that as well.
We'll point into the text and say it's right
Okay.
here.
Because you still have to go through the maps, still have to go through
Right.
the definitions, still have to go through the land
The
use, still have
text
to go through, I mean, this
has the
is,
specifics of the picture.
And I have no intention of rezoning that agricultural land something else.
Okay. So,
So
Leave
Leave
it the
the
way
Yeah.
map as it
Leave
is.
it.
leave it pink,
Leave
the
it.
whole parcel.
Let's do the hard work later, or the harder work later, or the hardest work later, or whatever, or continue. Anything else from any other board members?
Well, he said part of it looked like there was a typo in it. I couldn't figure out what the typo was.
I think there's an E, or an A that should be an E
We just
in
got
one
to
of the
different one.
words.
Hold on. We need to go back to number 2 here. I need to know if we're staying with
We're
the.
leaving the map color as is.
Okay.
That was unanimous, I believe.
In the 426 version.
Okay.
Yes,
Yeah,
thank
which-
you.
yeah, which version are we
Get the
doing?
right version.
Yes.
I was gonna bring all the versions and stack them in front of me, but you don't see me. So that's why I left them alone. It's like, okay, this is.
As a chair.
Exactly.
I'm really glad these things have dates on them.
I agree.
Yes.
I agree.
That was critical.
Yes, and page numbers. Page 47, 48, some places says here, also there's a text. Page 48, first full paragraph, he says.
And again, there's only been about 60 sets of eyes looking at this document over the
Yeah.
last 6 years.
He's seeing a typo. I don't know what he's seeing, so I don't know.
I think the word emanating may be misspelled. And I don't know if it's E-M-E-N-A-N.
I'm a horrible speller.
I'm a horrible speller too, so.
You got Google.
So,
Yeah, it was a
we'll
spell
do a
check.
spell check. to see
All
if
right,
we
just
have it.
double check.
All right.
Number 5,
Yep.
I thought we should acknowledge that if, and I thought I saw it in this draft. Was it put back in?
That's the one we just put back in, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
You kind of
so-
jumped ahead to that.
Yeah,
Yes.
Okay, so number 5 has been addressed?
yeah.
Yes.
that's in the draft.
It's been addressed already.
Yes, he just.
Yeah.
We put it back in.
older
Oh, okay.
Before the
That
change.
was the first one we did.
Yeah.
Number 3 hasn't been addressed, page 40.
Yeah, number 3, I don't have any notes on.
Page 44.
Okay, field work at the 7th that restricted should be reinstated, okay.
There's one sentence.
There's a sentence that says,
Development?
Yeah.
if you want to read the whole sentence, but it's.
Development within these sensitive areas is currently addressed to the
The
building
National
department.
Audubon Society, the EMC, and then what was stricken was development within these sensitive areas is currently addressed through the building department and the stormwater management officer, SML. That was taken out.
Yeah, what I don't like about that sentence is it sounds like we completely dealt with the issue, and I want to leave it more general as an issue we're dealing with. I don't mind acknowledging that we're dealing with it, but I don't want to say it's been dealt with.
Is,
Well, maybe you change the word addressed,
yeah, is currently
being
handling
reviewed or.
handled or reviewed,
Yeah,
currently
development.
reviewed.
Reviewed, yeah.
I like that, because they are reviewing it, but we can have more information.
I'd be okay with changing
All right.
address to reviewed and adding that sentence back in.
You want to say will be reviewed?
Or being
He's
reviewed.
being, he wants to acknowledge that we're doing something now, which
Yeah.
is fine, because we are.
Yeah.
So being reviewed.
Being reviewed.
Okay.
So
And
we'll
put
put that
that-
entire sentence back in.
But
With
we'll
that-
change that
with
word
that
to
change.
review. Yep,
And we're changing what word to review?
Addressed.
It says
address
address.
to review.
So
Okay.
we're putting that sentence, development within the
It's
sensitive
going back
areas is
in.
currently reviewed through the building department.
Yeah.
Being
Yeah,
reviewed.
Being
Being
reviewed.
So it
Is
sounds
currently
current.
being reviewed, right? So being reviewed is in and addressed is out.
Yeah.
And the rest of the sentence
Sentence
back,
is
yeah.
back in.
Okay. Don't go on
Address
yet.
to say it's solved already.
Got that one.
Right.
Did you get that one?
Yes, I got it.
Okay.
Doesn't mean it has being.
Right, right. Tense.
So why do we need being? I guess we
It's a
just.
tense agreement. It's currently reviewed. You don't need being.
You don't need being in there, you
Yes,
need.
Okay.
review.
thank you.
Currently reviewed.
Okay?
Okay.
And I'm just.
So then.
So
Yes.
so it's currently reviewed?
Yes.
Yes.
becomes reviewed.
So the
Gotcha.
address comes out and review goes in.
Yep.
All right.
And that
And
goes
the rest
back
of the
in.
sentence goes in.
Yes,
And
no,
that rest of that sentence goes in.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, I had a
I agree
question
with
on
that, I
number
guess.
7.
Okay, so all in favor of that one?
Aye.
Yeah,
Opposed?
Are we still on number 6 now, or did we address 6?
We did 6.
we
We
did.
did 6.
I had a question on 7.
We did 6?
We
Yeah,
didn't
we
do
did.
6.
We did
Yeah.
5.
We did 5 and then we jumped back to 3.
We're on 6.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, page 70.
Did you just trump me? Or did you just trump right in?
No,
Okay.
sorry.
Okay, you want to go in sequence? You want to do 6?
Six.
I'm fine.
And you got focused on 7, pretty good.
Stop. Don't put that in there.
No, that's right. Strike that from the record.
The page 70 is what the county 239 review required us to do, and if we change that, we're gonna have to take it back to the county and see if they approve it.
Which we don't want to do.
Well, not necessarily, it's a recommendation from the county. And if you have 4 or 5 of the town board members want to change that, and when you pass the adopted plan, then you can override their recommendation.
I understand, I don't wanna change it.
Okay, well, that's-
Anybody else? Personal opinion, I think we're dealing with semantics here.
That's my opinion. I
And-
mean, I think it is important, we all know it's important, we're working on it.
Yes,
So can we all agree then that enhance could mean expand too?
it could.
You could?
Or could we not make an argument the other way then?
Well, it says
Okay,
not
that's it.
necessarily
Yeah.
expand, so it doesn't eliminate.
It has some flexibility.
to enhance, not necessarily
Just-
expand.
As a reminder, this language was actually hashed out as fair compromise language between these two competing
It was.
interests
So I agree.
to satisfy the county, and the county said, okay, we get it, that's good enough.
Okay.
Okay.
I would say,
All right.
since the consensus is let it alone,
We'll
I
walk
would
around
recommend
this
you
one and
do
let's go
so
on to the
because
next one.
No,
Yeah.
go sit
I
on
like
go
that.
sit on your file of comments.
There you go. Okay, so I think we're on to number 7.
Consensus on that?
So everybody, we're leaving that one as is?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Okay.
What is the cost? Why does he bring up costs?
I think,
Creating this committee is gonna be,
I don't know if he's thinking about staff time or legal time or things of that nature, but if you have
Probably
a
a
committee,
combination
then
of
you've got to put out mailings, you've got to do minutes, you know, get into the administrative side of things. Now, the other thing too is Larry sat on the EMC board for I don't know how many years.
He's
probably.
comparing this to
Yeah.
the Conservation Advisory Board in Ithaca, and we're considering this in a different way, and I think the planning board will be a part of how to, it's not an exclusive thing, it's not going to have oversight regulation at this point. We're in
Well, and
agreement, right?
it's at the pleasure of the town board.
Right.
Am I wrong, guy, about that? I mean, is there?
No, that's correct. A Conservation Advisory Committee may or may not lead to a Conservation Advisory Board. I think some of Larry's concerns, depending on where you want to step off the bus, are perfectly valid relative to Conservation Advisory Boards.
Right.
Which we
And
acknowledge.
I think there's some truth to increased costs from committees, but I think they also save you costs too, because every piece of legwork that they do is a piece of legwork that's taken off town staff or town professional staff to go through. So if a
And-
committee says, we'll go call Corps of Engineers on something and make a recommendation, that means Mike doesn't have to do it, or Lynn doesn't do it, or Guy doesn't do it, or Dave Eric doesn't do it. So it is a budgetary issue. I would encourage you to keep an eye on it, but it's going to produce some costs and it's going to produce some savings. And if it works, it works. You'll keep it, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and you won't keep it.
But not, like, so in that case, or that scenario, it's a net zero thing, it's a linear move. The only thing that I would see is first of all, how are we gonna set it up? And I know this is minutia at this point, that's just a rhetorical question then. And then, secondly, what review and how are we gonna let that board go? So what's the first task they have? And I guess we should talk about that because that's gonna inevitably be what comes down the pipe first.
Mhm.
So are we first off gonna try to take some inventory of something and establish what we're conserving, not to belittle the word or anything with the CAC,
Or simply what we have.
what we have in place?
Right.
Do we have that?
And we haven't decided
We've got
what
an
to
idea.
conserve.
Right.
Typical things that it would do is it would take an inventory of open space. So just like we have
Right.
a unique natural areas map, we have an open space map that actually define it as opposed to everybody's judgment right now. That's open. I don't think so. Another thing that it could look at is cultural places in the town. Just say these are important cultural things that we want to preserve, and just go through as a community and talk about what those are, as opposed to everybody's got their own opinion and nobody's really discussed it. So those are the kinds of things that it would make an inventory, which I think the planning board they could use when they're doing their reviews to say, well, we've got these inventories that we can work with.
Right, and I guess one of the biggest problems I've heard from, several planning board members and things of that, people involved with that, is it going to add another layer of approval for something?
Is it going to add
There's
time
no-
to the
The
process?
committee is
Well,
not,
and once again, we go back to time is money.
the committee is not, the committee's gonna create these inventories. And then we want-
Initially.
Yeah, and then.
And then what?
And then the board decides what they wanna do. Do they just wanna have those sit on a shelf? Do they wanna have something else happen with them? That's the next step that the board discusses. Do they wanna take some other step?
Right, and as long as, that's fine, but as long as we're not interfering with what on people's land, other than what we already have to do by our zoning maps and whatnot, okay? We've got a unique natural area that somebody has this vision of a beautiful house on. Are we gonna say, no, you can't do that because we like looking that way?
Well,
I mean,
one thing that might happen is that we evaluate areas that we don't know about because they are on private land, and we provide the communication between the Finger Lakes Land Trust and the owner to talk about conservation easements. It is not imposing anything, it's offering things to people.
well, once
So
again.
it's like education.
No, you're right, I agree. However, you don't want to see, I don't like being overbearing in that situation. What's going to happen to their land
What they
if they do
decide to
nothing?
do.
It's just
What
like
they
in these
decide to
natural
do.
areas. It doesn't stop them from building their house there. It doesn't create a regulatory barrier. It just says, notice it before you make a decision.
If that's all it is,
It's a resource.
and that's what the CAC,
Is
and we
gonna create.
bring, so essentially their first task is to go in and get an inventory of what areas that are,
What we direct them to get an inventory of.
well.
Right, the first step would be a resolution that identifies what its duties and goals are.
So we're not, right at this point, I guess my last point would be, I understand you guys, but is, we don't want to become Ithaca, with Ithaca's CAB.
Right.
Okay, that's what I'm fine with that.
No, a conservation advisory board is even governed by a completely different statute. If you didn't want a board, you would not graduate your conservation advisory committee to the next level, you'd leave them advisory.
So once again, at the town board's pleasure.
Correct.
The town board makes that decision.
All right, so if the town board or the future town boards want to make that decision, they're welcome to. Okay, I'm all right with that then.
Or if they say
Do you have any
this
comments?
council has done nothing and
That
we
would
don't
be
see its
different.
purpose, they could dissolve it, move on.
Okay.
In some ways, being a landowner, a little bit bigger than most, but not that big. We have an area that I would love to see go to Finger Lakes Trust, but the main reason, or it's along Salmon Creek Road and it's the near Bird Sanctuary, is because the hunters abuse it. And
I know
it's-
exactly what piece you're talking about.
yeah, and it's shocking, but we do not have time to walk around our property, even though parts of it are posted. And I personally don't own a gun and never will, but time to go around during hunting season and saying, you're not invited, you didn't ask. And so, I mean, there's areas that are that would be nice if they were protected better. And there's someone who owns property and I can't do it. So I don't know how,
Is it your property that you own or is it somebody else's?
no, we don't.
Both.
So,
No.
it-
There's
so
a whole lot of people down there that are saying the same thing
Yeah.
that.
The farmers are having the same problem.
Yes, and it
Yeah,
would be
people-
nice, it would be nice for them to do an inventory, so, and if it is something like the bird, what's the formal name for the group that owns it?
Bird sanctuary?
It's
It is
all
just
about-
bird sanctuary?
I think it's.
You know, maybe they should be a little more pushy, or at least come to us and say, would you like us?
We'd like to expand,
Expand
let's
this,
have a conversation.
Because we're not benefiting from this,
Right.
that's for sure.
so is this an enforcement concern or? I mean, somebody's on your property without permission, is that an enforcement
Yeah,
concern?
for me it is,
Is that something that the authorities need to be notified of this? And-
maybe. But then again, you don't want people super mad at you either, especially the ones who own guns. So, I'd like to see an inventory done and for different situations like this where they say, yes, this is really a unique area.
Right.
And then do you want to
What are the
consider giving it?
pros and
Yes,
cons
pros.
of changing
Yes.
how it's managed?
Yes.
Well, you can set it up in steps, so that maybe the first step is just appointing the committee,
Yes.
doing the inventory, and then waiting till you get the results back before you make any recommendations.
That's right,
Absolutely.
that's right, that's absolutely right. I'd
If
like
we
to
could-
see an
We can move this
inventory.
forward and discuss this.
That process gets pretty complicated. It took 4 months just to get, I mentioned this earlier to some in the room, but another CAC that I work with does do conservation easements directly from citizens for the smaller pieces that the land trust won't touch because they can't leave an endowment for management or it's not enough acreage. And it took about 4.5 months to get USDA approval to overlay our town-based easement over their wetlands easement. Which you can do, it's just, it takes them a long time to answer it.
That doesn't
So
sound
there
like
are-
very long for government for months.
Well, they had some help, but let's just leave it at that.
Yeah.
All I'm
Okay.
saying is
I
that,
mean, for years.
that some of this stuff takes a long, long, long time. The CAC, basically, it will take years just to inventory the open space and rank it according to its suitability, desirability,
sure,
et cetera.
sure.
You're not just gonna look at a Google Earth map and go, okay, we're done.
Oh, no.
It doesn't work that
I
way.
would-
So,
Yeah.
That's a lot of footwork.
so to
Yeah.
move this along, what I would like to see done in the future, and once again, we're getting into the specifics as opposed to the conceptual, is let's, just for our town board's sake, when we discuss this, let's make it small and a doable task, and let's do baby steps and see how this evolves.
And
Okay?
Larry,
And do baby steps for this and see as they grow.
Right.
What their.
That makes sense.
Because I gotta tell you, the Water and Sewer Advisory Board saves a lot of time for the planning board.
If you make it too big, it's not gonna get
It's
done.
bogged down,
It's
right?
gonna get caught up in,
So I move to leave this alone.
okay.
I second.
Any further discussion? Laura?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
I'd like to make another motion that when Larry retires from the planning board, we appoint him to this Conservation Advisory Committee.
I think there's a fair comment.
It's a 7-year
Yeah, he's got 7 years, so.
He keeps hinting, he keeps
Can I-
hinting.
Can I, for the sake of argument, just note that you did take a vote on every decision that you made, either to adopt or not adopt a change, but you didn't actually say aye or nay on the leave the pink spot alone on the map?
That was number,
Okay,
Just, you didn't actually vote on
Oh,
that.
we didn't vote on that one?
is
sure.
that number
We
two?
voted
So
on
does someone want to
everything.
move to leave the pink spot
I
alone?
hope we leave the pink spot on
I'll
there.
second that.
Okay.
Just,
Laura?
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
You name,
I'm not naming.
okay.
you're going to be consistent, tired of system, tired of scratch. I know, we just discussed it, I just wanted to get lost.
The document that we'd actually be approving, I assume gets rid of all the red lines
Yes,
all through this, and will get repaginated as a result.
yes, it'll have a new look
Whoa,
to it, the
that's
page
a
numbers will all
Paginated,
change.
and you can't spell. You come up with that word, that's a Scrabble word right there, buddy.
But is it paginated or paginated?
Wow. Can we talk about that for 45 minutes? Would you
No.
like that?
No, short meeting.
Resolution to close, we close the public hearing yet?
Yes,
We
we
did.
We did.
We're now in the form of, I believe, going into the seeker.
Yes. That's the
18.
technical.
I'll move that resolution. Okay, amendment of existing town comprehensive plan.
Well, you need to do the seeker.
Yeah, do the
Yes,
seeker.
Yeah, the
Yes.
seeker first, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Was reading them together, they looked almost exact.
When is what?
How hunting season
start?
If you're from the city, anytime. If you're.
I actually thought
I thought you said county.
I thought you said
Season was
different.
I did
yesterday.
That's open. Well, actually.
Turkey season was yesterday, and they were all out on the fields on the way up here to Montgomery.
No,
You want to
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes,
punch through the seeker? Okay.
we.
You've all seen this.
Lay it on.
This is like the 4th iteration and update. This thing has morphed along with the history. So as came up many times before, a comprehensive plan, particularly this one, as it's been changed and amended over the years, really is specifically designed to protect the environment from deleterious impacts, not to create deleterious impacts. And so the question always comes down to whether or not this plan constitutes a significant change or reordering of resource priorities. And so technically, according to counsel for the DEC, this would be an unlisted action because we're not adopting a new plan. There's a glitch in the seeker regs. And he agreed with that, but I had recommended to the town board that we go with a full EAF because getting information is the goal, and the full EAF is going to do a better job of that than the short form. So with that said, the result of the full EAF is very long and prodigious. So you're looking at the various issues. Will there be potential impacts on land? Yes. Comp plans can always spawn construction and land impacts, but they are plans in and of themselves and do not cause anything. They seek to regulate growth and avoid these impacts. Nonetheless, this complete section is completed, and while areas that are identified for increased density or commercial uses are still subject to impacts, not all of which may be mitigated by site planning or permitting, we nonetheless have done the individual review on each of the subsections. And each of the subsections I can read through individually. They all have a number of comments. I think there are copies back on the back table, but nowhere a small impact was the recommendation based on the analysis and a whole lot of mapping and input. If you have any particular matter in there that you would like to discuss, like construction on land or a potential future excavation, some of this is just too speculative because you don't have a project. Obviously, some things are really easy, like coastal erosion hazard areas. We don't have a designated area here. So the overall conclusion down all of those categories was no or small impact. Nothing would, resulting from the changes in this plan, based on what the old plan was, nothing would trigger a moderate or significant impact on those levels. So impact on geological features is the second one, and we checked that yes too, because there are some key geological features, but the ones that exist, and even taking into account the UNAs that exist, we don't have a project that is imposing a specific change in the land use, and none of the changes in the comprehensive plans made changes in those particular areas. So nothing really changes, therefore this amendment doesn't produce an impact. Impact on surface water, again, we're adjacent to a lake and we have a lot of T-designated streams.
Can we go back?
Yeah, go back.
Okay, so 2A, in this, and I just want to acknowledge that everyone in the state agrees that this form is set up for construction projects and not regulatory stuff. And so you're trying to shoehorn in.
A lot of it doesn't fit.
It just doesn't work. But 2A, you have an answer. See listing above, the plan has specific land use and natural resource goals that will enhance the protection of the environment and prevent negative impacts to such resources. I think prevent's too strong a word. I think you want to say avoid.
Or help prevent or avoid?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I don't think we can say we're preventing all negative impacts.
That's probably true. Okay. And if there's other,
I've got a
comments
whole
like
list
that,
here that we can go through.
that's fine. Impacts on surface water, the answer was yes, but again, this is really project-based. It says you're resulting in specific types of impacts from breaking soil, like turbidity. So the general comment on this was same impacts of this sort are speculative relative to a comp plan, and the plan does everything it reasonably can to protect and preserve water quality, including wetlands, UNAs, identifying the need to retire septic systems and well, recognizing the primacy of stormwater controls and the need to protect Hugo Lake and its tributary streams. And when you go through the individual list, there's I'd have to know my alphabet a little more strongly than I do, but I believe there's 12 subsections. Everything from whether or not you're creating new water bodies to whether or not you're constructing one or more discharges for outfalls. We again triggered no or small impact on all of those based on the analysis and mapping that was done. Does anyone have alternate conclusions? Okay. Groundwater, again, we checked yes. And again, we have a general comment. Groundwater impacts are specifically considered, and land use patterns, specifically areas where densities continue to be supported, are geared towards locations where density exists, had and has been planned, and then I referenced the multiple prior comp plans as well as the county's 2015 plan, and where existing roadway, water, and sewer infrastructure support density mixed uses and mitigate the impacts thereof.
I'd like to,
Help.
I'd like to change the first, I'd like to drop the first specifically.
Okay.
Groundwater is mentioned once in the entire plan as a passing comment, so I think saying specifically considered overstates the case, so I just
Okay.
dropped it specifically.
Okay. And when you want us to say help mitigate instead of mitigate again?
Sure.
Same comment? Okay. So in terms of water supplies, we're dealing with Bolton Point, which is well below its permitted capacity. To the extent that the plan is following the county concept of nodal development and trying to get utility infrastructure such as sewers to that area, that's where I'm looking at some of the stuff that doesn't say groundwater, but clearly is groundwater geared. You know, basically the comp plan doesn't prevent that you'll not be pumping in more wells and pumping in more septic systems. But if you're steering towards areas where you do have sewer and the consolidated water district, you're helping preventing poking more holes in the ground. That's all
I
look
think
at
it, but you say that we're redirecting development density areas with existing facilities, and the plan basically talks about residential for everything below Peruville Road, not all of which has existing facilities. So I think we can't say that we're directing it just to places with existing facilities there.
Okay.
Maybe we're attempting.
And there's a typo, using key nodal plan. Just FYI.
Oh, maybe it's, okay, I'm using the, okay. So,
If you're trying to make a square peg in a round hole here, I think you're trying to do the conceptual again, which is, once again, to encourage, and when you talk about density, infrastructure, you talk about south of Proville Road, you mean towards the village where the density is growing, where the water lines are. We're hoping the sewer will be someday. So you're trying to address that with the groundwater. So, I mean, we're into one word or two words here. I understand that.
would you be happy if it said redirect some development and density?
Yeah, I just don't want to say that we're sending all the density to areas with existing facilities, because that's not actually true.
Well, it is.
We're directing.
I think it's trying to get there, but I don't care about the word some. It's your,
Yeah, I want to modify that slightly.
as the town board, it's your review and your conclusions.
I understand that, but one of the purposes of infrastructure is to encourage density there.
Yes.
That's the whole point of doing this. So once again, to make it wide lens, so attempting to or whatever, I mean, I'm not going to 45 minutes over one or two words, because I think we all are trying to say the same thing. Some of us are at 6, some are at half a dozen, but we're all saying the same thing. So whatever this comfort level is, that's fine, because like I said before, at the end of the day, there's a lot more work to be done, so that's fine.
5, impact on flooding. Again, check yes. And the general comment, and again, this is very, very development oriented, resulting in development in specific floodplains, altering specific drainage and non-natural drainage patterns, building dams, things like that. But the general comment is that the areas of the town in flood zones are either already developed or protected by the plan and goals set forth in the plan. To the extent construction is proposed in such areas or along the lakeshore or adjacent to steep slopes, heightened review is proposed and required, and the town's recently updated floodplain local law will affect further controls. Moreover, modernization of lakeshore zones and natural resource goals such as steep slopes here further helps mitigate the risk of negative impact. I'll put the word helps back in there. That's the general comment. Any concerns with those? Because they all clicked off no or moderate or small impact. Impacts on air, this is absolutely project related because it deals with federal and state emission standards, smoke and emissions converted to tons per year, so that's no impact. 7, impact on plants and animals. We clicked yes, mainly because in doing environmental mapping around the town and clicking buttons here and there, we do have some endangered listed and even some rare and threatened species. and more so in areas that are within some mapped, like near Wyckoff Swamp, which is over towards the town Dryden line. So the general comment is, as above, there can be impacts in the rare, endangered, and threatened species. A part of this study are examined during each land use application process. To the extent any UNA, wetland, upland, or forested swamp or significant natural community has been found or mapped, it is noted as being deserving of attention and protection in this comp plan. And
So
then,
the power plant,
huh?
the power plant, that plant, it's threatened and endangered.
But it's not a
Is that a
native
different animal,
species.
different plant?
It's not a flora.
I don't think it's on the endangered species list.
So all the impacts came out negative, and there's a general note and other that talks about augmented review processes that are in the comp plan. So the next one is impact on agricultural resources, but since Andra doesn't care about farming, we clicked yes there again, and the general comment is all development directly or indirectly impacts ag resources, and this comp plan not only recognizes such a reality, but adopts the specific recommendations to protect and advance agriculture as an important resource and identified public good, including by adopting and integrating the ag use resources plan and proposing a split of the RA zone into a true ag zone and secondary use ag zone.
I have a quick question about this. When the town board approved the ag plan, did it go through a secret process on that?
Yeah, fully AF.
Yes.
Did any of these questions change at all?
Right, and that was my note under H, other impacts. Previously adopted ag plan as part of master plan and also results in mitigation of any potential negative impacts. And there is a comment here, I think it's in the finding statements in part 3 that says, and in addition to this, we also did a full review of the ag plan.
Yeah,
So
that's in that long.
I think that's the reason, one of the reasons that I ended up clicking no on everything, because I did go back and review that to see what was triggered. And it's the same stuff, and it still came out with the same measurement. Impact on aesthetic resources, again, we click yes. Scenic vistas, thank you, Larry, for not being here. And UNAs are specifically required to be protected. Tourism and the open rural beauty are specifically part of the enhancement plan for future planning, including by recommending more connectivity through trails, parks and recreation areas, and development of tourism resources along the designated Cuda Lake scenic byways. The byways is also specifically protected and as noted as an important resource in the plan. And again, there's not really something that's going to be changing the ground or impacting a historic site or archaeological dig site or archaeosensitive resource in a plan. It just doesn't affect land in that area. And most of the areas that show up as the little gray maps on the CRIS mapping I tagged, and again, they're not in areas where the major changes are occurring. So I got to know we're small impact because we're not altering that priority. Impact on historic and archaeological resources, again, that's very close to the exact same thing as impact on aesthetic resources. Same as other answer, this plan recognizes and protects these resources, as well as seeks to identify and develop zoning and other tools to protect these valuable community resources. And one of the things that was looked at specifically is noted as the CRIS database mapping for these types of resources. But again, a no was really checked down the board on this area, and the last section doesn't apply because we didn't check moderate impact for sub-impacting. 11, open space and recreation impacts. Yes, always an impact, but the comp plan promotes and protects these resources, proposes and plans for their future enhancement and preservation, expansion, and even calls for a 5-year capital planning cycle to assure future generations that parks, trails, and recreation areas are always conserved and advanced within the town. This is a very small section, but the town has taken very specific steps in the plan to deal with these particular issues, including, although I didn't mention it again, but CAC is part of that. So we got to know our small impacts. Impact on CEAs, the answer is no. We don't have any, but there is an area of North Lansing reasonably close to Wyckoff Swamp. While no part of that CEA is within the town, that area was still examined and is guarded by the ag designation due to its location and large wetlands in the areas. So we didn't trigger that one, but I noted we looked at it anyway. Impact on transportation, yes, there are always transportation transportation impacts are unavoidable in a community that imports workers from neighboring counties, but we address them in this plan in the same manner as the county addressed them in their 2015 comprehensive plan, including by promoting, and I'm paraphrasing, I'm not reading verbatim, including by proposing affordable housing, intelligent streets, traffic impact studies, adoption of complete street guidelines, and form-based zoning tools in certain denser areas and business parks, adding commuter and transportation and recreation trails, etc.
I'm wondering whether we should talk about the Tech County's 239 review there, in which they're worried about transportation issues based on some of the density levels, and whether we should say that further studies are going to happen on those impacts.
It is in our resolution.
It's in there.
Yeah, I'm just wondering whether it should be something like that in here too, saying, because we're talking about transportation, what are the impacts, and we're saying those will be studied further based on the county's 239 review, something like that.
You want to make references to
Under
something
other
like this?
impacts
Yeah,
F,
that's
if
fine.
I add a paragraph describing the county's response and our reply there to it, the county's approval of our reply, that would be?
Something like that.
Okay.
I think you just reinforce the fact that
We noticed.
we know this and we take this seriously.
Yeah.
Well, and we also included a whole transportation section, which looked at the future impacts. That was what that study was all about.
And our transportation section is actually almost entirely consistent with the county plan, so I never understood that comment from them, but that's okay.
I just want to acknowledge it here because I think it's very pertinent.
Okay. Impact on energy, yes, obviously a plan doesn't use energy, but this plan by its own goals. What?
Copier.
All right.
Yeah, I did have an
That would be a minor impact.
Okay.
It promotes energy diversity, conservation, clean energy, including efficiency of system efficiencies, avoiding land disturbances from infrastructure, promoting alternative energy and sources, the adoption of regulations to review and permit the same. And those local laws are already underway, in case anyone's wondering. And I also noted that they are goals that are merely continued and enhanced from the last two comprehensive plans. So there is no change, and therefore any impacts from these modifications would be small or minor. Any concerns or questions? Noise, odor, and light, those are all very, very specific to ground-based developmental impacts in relation to hospitals, schools, the generation of odors, so that was a no. We didn't review that section. There's nothing in there that could get triggered. Impact on human health, again, the vast majority of that, and that's number 16, is related to specific types of projects, altering solid waste management facilities, changing the rate of disposals, disturbances within a certain amount of footage of solid waste or hazardous waste sites. But nonetheless, we did check yes, and in a sense, plans always have impacts on health, but this plan seeks to minimize certain negative health impacts and steer intensive land uses to low impact areas. While adopting an amended plan that does not substantially reorder resource protection or priorities does not affect any change, the individual health factors are reviewed and appropriate update to the plan goals adopted to help prevent and mitigate speculative or potential issues that could arise from future land uses. So that's basically a reference to the fact that human health was issues and impacts, whether it's relating to energy or recreation or open spaces, were a big part of the updates and amendments in this section of the plan. That's what led to that conclusion. Number 17 is consistent with community plans. That checked a no, but there's a lot of comments in that section. The master comment basically says, the amended comp plan is not materially different than the older plan. It is modernized. Its two key areas of distinction are the enhancement of agricultural preservation and the recognition of a need for integrated communities, resource protection, and useful open spaces. These are deemed consistent with existing plan and identified goals of many documents and longstanding policies of the town. And then it has individual sub-comments about whether we're consistent with the county plan. Are we changing an area that was sort of low density to high density, and that's not really occurring anywhere in this plan. I think when we get to zoning, that is where you will look at some of this stuff on a deeper look. But the boxes all wouldn't be checked down because the answer was no. It is actually under seeker standards consistent with existing community plans. It's an update. Same answer as to consistency with community character. It didn't really alter or existing land use or resource policy. It augmented the 2003 and 2006 plans by modernizing, using better analytical and regulatory tools to prevent or help mitigate, I'll put the word help in there again, negative impacts, all while implementing the same visions as expressed in the comp plan. There's one section that's relatively new, but it doesn't create a major impact, and that's having a separate delineated section on climate change, greenhouse gas emissions, smart building initiatives, things like that. That's a relatively new section, but it's not a reordering of a priority. It's just advancing that to its own category, which I don't think is a negative environmental impact. So unless there's other questions or changes, that would be part 2, and you could move on to part 3. There is an analysis which is there that summarizes a lot of this and how Article 8 works.
So this section here?
A little smaller, please.
Well, I wanted to, I was trying to not kill paper, but the short answer is it's basically it's basically an amalgamation of those various answers and a text form explanation supporting why you may believe a negative declaration is appropriate as to this amendment, if that's what you indeed vote.
Well, you also make reference to the 239 in here also.
Yes.
I'm confused as to why you say it's not a type 1 action, because when I read the law, it says the adoption of a municipality's land use plan, the adoption of an agency's comprehensive resource management plan for, are type 1. And so why is this not a type 1?
Well, we treated it as a type 1,
I
so
know,
it
but I
doesn't
just
matter.
don't- I just don't
Because
understand.
this isn't an adoption of the plan, it's an amendment of the plan. The actual resource use adoption, there's a glitch in the seeker regulations, and there's a difference between amending a plan or amending zoning and adopting
Okay.
new zoning. They are actually in the review process and have been for about 2 years, actually since 2013. And they're nearing the end of some of the review periods to actually update the seeker regulations and catch up with the changes in the forms. They haven't done that yet. I had that question, have long recognized that question. I talked to another local practitioner who also practices environmental law, and we chopped through it. I contacted Region 7 DEC's council, who's now actually a lead council for the whole DEC, and went through this, and they actually put it on their list of things to change in the regs, because I think it should be type 1, unless it's really a de minimis change. I don't think this was de minimis. And I said, look, I understand that it's supposed to be an unlisted action because of the way the regulations sit, but I'm just not comfortable if it's a really comprehensive review and update saying it should be type 1, because I think you need a deeper look to see if you actually have reordered or changed your priorities. And he said, well, that's probably the safe course. So I agree with you, but the actual wording of the regulation makes a distinction between the adoption of the plan and the amendment of a plan. And there is a type 2 category that says actions consistent with existing community policies that don't affect a major reordering of any community resource or land use priorities. So there's actually a level of argument that you could make that it could be type 2 as well, which I think is an even further stretch. So when it's something like this and it's something that's this important, do the type 1, take the deeper, harder look, because that's what seeker's about. That was my recommendation, even though I think technically it's unlisted. But we didn't do an unlisted review. I just want to point that out so there's a record that we went above and beyond the call of duty. So whether that's worth anything, I'll leave that to individual conscience of all those here. So you may proceed as you desire as a board, and I can answer questions if you want. I can tell you what maps I looked at, what data points exist, whatever.
I guess the one other point is on this page, we put Mike Long's contact information, and on the end, we say Ed signing off on this, and I'm wondering if those should be consistent and put Ed's contact information.
Well, it originally did have Ed's contact information, and at one time it had mine, but I left it as Mike's in the final take. You can put whatever you want in there, because he was actually the person to which all the input from the involved and interested agencies and the comments from the county were going through, and I thought it wiser to keep all information as to seeker going through that one point. Ed's on the last one because he's the one who's usually authorized to sign it, though technically any public officer could be authorized to sign it.
When we reviewed this, we designated one person to be the contact person, and of
Okay.
course, I'm CC'd and everything. But that way you'll have consistent information coming back and forth as opposed to, and I think it's much, it was quicker also. But at the end of the day, it falls into on my table.
I saw it.
Yes,
Your name there a
yes,
couple
at the end of the day, it comes to me,
It's the
so.
signature.
Well, it's not blindly signed, it's like, okay, where are we with this, where are we this, where are we this, as we methodically go through this. And of course, when we do the secret, the board has to approve it first before we go from there. Their comfort zone has to be met. And hopefully it is. If not, we'll wait and entertain more questions from the board.
I move we approve it.
Approved as we've amended it?
No. Of course.
Well, you're moving to approve the negative declaration,
Yes.
duly noting the amendments to the Part 2 and
Yep.
the Part 3.
Yes.
So is that the resolution that's on the table? 'Cause that's where the neg deck is actually made. Okay.
I'll second it.
Who motion?
Doug?
Doug.
And Andres second.
Andrew Benson?
Yes.
Katrina Binkowitz?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Joseph Wetmore?
Yes.
And Levine?
Yes. So now, couple of comments. The 239 was sent, and it came back. And Michael, you want to express any comments, concerns that were addressed by the county?
I think, as you know, we've kept the county informed throughout the entire process. As you know, I think I've been involved with this project for about 3.5, 4 years at this point. And we gave it to them when the Comprehensive Plan Committee had their initial version. We had the update with the Planning Board version, and then we gave them the recent changes that the town board has made since last December. So they basically agreed with all the changes that we had made over those last couple months, especially the last couple weeks. And basically their main concern is, as Joe's noted earlier, that just the density of the development within Lansing, and again, the key becomes the update of the land use ordinance. And currently, those density requirements are greater now than they will be as part of this project. I think what we were trying to do was stress the importance of the water and sewer and infrastructure, you know, and so they just assumed that we're going to build out the entire area. As you all know, not everybody decides they're going to build to the nth degree, that they're going to build as dense as they're permitted to do. Just to give you one example, you have the Cuba Orchard project. Currently, right now, they can probably be 3 times as dense as they currently are. You know, they're keeping more land in reserve, they're more green space, more stormwater ponds and things of that nature. So the county has asked us to, as part of our adoption of the comprehensive plan, is to put in there that we will look at the density requirements as we go to the next step. As we look at the land use ordinance, and we'll come back with a more specific formula as to how dense things are. It's a little open-ended right now with the current ordinance because it just primarily regulates the minimum lot size and the minimum amount of road frontage that you need to create a parcel. I think what we've got to do is spend a little bit more time looking at where there's currently infrastructure in place, we can have a little higher density. The intent of the comprehensive plan was to really go back and look at the waterfront properties and where there's already currently developed cottages that are very small footprints, not allow the rest of the whole waterfront to be at that same density level. And that was the intent of creating 2 zones. So as we get into the specifics of that, we'll be a little bit more general in terms of trying to make the leap from the 20,000 square foot to 30,000 or 40,000 or 5 acres or whatever it becomes as part of the process. So we've assured the county that we're including that as part of it. As you saw in the recent 239 review, they basically took all the comments out except for there were 3 different alternates in terms of going forward. And again, it all depends on the final implementation of the land use ordinance. Again, I assume that we'll continue to keep them involved in the duration of the process and the development of the ideas, but as I noted earlier, the transportation study that was done by the Cornell Design Connect program was really looking at all the projects that have currently been approved and what the impacts would be on the transportation systems. And they all came back that we're between 40 and 50% of capacity of the highway. So I think we're in good shape there. I think their main concern is just that they didn't want to see another city spring up in Lansing overnight. And I don't think it's going to happen. I mean, it's taken you 40 years to get to the point where you've gone from 4,000 people to 11,000 people. So, you know, I don't think you're going to see a tremendous change overnight, but it's something that you have to look at in terms of future development. So,
the dynamics of density are interesting because you see the initial concerns and then you look beneath the surface at all the dynamics.
mm-hmm.
It was just about, bless you, it was just about running a water line, then basically from here up to the power plant would be jammed full of houses. But it hasn't happened. There's other dynamics, which is homeowners or landowners don't want to sell their land out there, number one. They like to keep it the way it is. Mm-hmm. Number two, the dynamics are that with the density, there's not sewer out there, or the fact is that they may not want to live out there. So all these different dynamics that go on about density, they have concerns about this. You know, the other thing is that are the jobs here? You know, well, if you're associated with certain businesses, yes, but if you're not, no. So all these different dynamics that happen, you know, that you like to push the panic button, but we like to see where the methodical growth is going to be. And a lot of that has to do with who wants to live next to each other. If the land's not for sale, it's not for sale. Simple as that. So homeowners have a lot more control than they think they do over how this gets developed. You know, for a lot of the people with these water lines we're proposing, they just want drinkable water. It's more of a health issue more than expansion. You know, for some, it was because they now can build where before their building lots weren't allowed. But for a lot of them, they're taking a beating on the inside of their pipes, and they have to haul in water. So there's a lot of different dynamics going on when you find out a water line. So I tend to agree with Michael that you simply have to take a step back, like with the traffic. You know, we're at 40 to 50, on certain times of the day, yeah, it's tough. But, you know, on other times of the day, it's not. So when you look at 50%, I understand all those dynamics as we change. Having said that, any other questions for our planner?
So what do we have to do
Well,
for
I guess
the
Guy has
county
drafted
with the
a
recommended
resolution.
modifications?
Well, those have already been addressed in the last one.
That's what I
And those
thought, but
recommendations
it's the
are
state
there.
may
Basically,
first.
the C recommendation.
Well, what we did is we threw it back to the county with the red line changes.
Right.
And say, does that trigger another review, or are you comfortable with this? And it's 10 business days is what it is. So we have to be very careful that if you give it on Friday, you could be looking at 14 days with the 2 weekends. So we were very fortunate. The other thing, too, though, is that if you have at least a supermajority, you can override the county recommendations. So it's not like the county states this is the way it is and you're going to have to live with it. But you also try to work within their parameters also. And I think by not triggering this, is why we're very delicate to not change one word and that's it, and push this. Remember, we concentrate on concepts and let's worry about the specifics later. That was one of these reasons, because we had the approval of the 239. So we're in a great position now, I guess, if somebody wants to make a motion to approve this, or you want to talk about this some more.
Well, the way I look at this, the county came back with their recommendations, and basically they gave us 3 options. There's A, B, and C. And at this point, the way I'm looking at it, C is the option that we've set up and put as part of the adoption. Again, Guy has added that into the resolution, so it's very clearly there. I had already added it back into the actual comprehensive plan as an action item, so I think it's well understood that this is the process. But as you know, we're going to have to go to adopt the land use ordinance anyway. We're going to have another shot at reviewing it at that point too. So we're going to have to go through the process anyway.
Okay.
So I'm comfortable recommending to the town board that I think we fulfilled all the requirements of the 239 review. As Guy said, we've negotiated a couple things back and forth. We've come to agreement on the language. I think it's something that we can all live with.
I think it's safe to say that the handful of changes we made tonight are not gonna upset the county or
No.
be considered significant?
Actually, most of the changes they had already reviewed and commented on, you mostly put
They
stuff
they
back
were okay
in.
the first time when
Yeah,
they were in there.
That's, I was reading this over and I said, okay, we're giving them more, we're giving them more. We actually gave them more, so. So now are we at the stage of,
Well, to tell you the truth, when Doug moved, I said the one that's on the paper and everybody seconded, I thought you were approving the comprehensive plan in the
I
right
thought
time.
we were approving the seeker rate.
so did I.
Okay, well then change that
Would you like
to
to
they
make a
moved and
motion?
So you want to take a shot at this?
I guess it messed up the first.
All right, then, you move to the
I'll
head.
move it
They
again. Or
they
move
actually motioned and
To pass the
Yes, comprehensive.
That's what I
It
motioned to
always-
do.
First time. That's what I understood, and that's why I was making it clear, but if everyone thought they were voting to amend the
Move the
seeker,
seeker.
which you don't have to do.
I must
because-
have mumbled.
Well, then, you want to do it again, just for the sake of the record?
Mumbled.
Well, if we're approving this, I want to read it,
Okay.
which is going to take me about 5 minutes. Because I just got this a few minutes ago, I haven't read it actually, to know what's in it.
Haven't read the,
The whereases?
So all the whereases. I don't have to read it aloud, I just want to read it. I think there's copies back there.
you want to take a break?
But
Yeah,
we could move it and second it, and then,
sure. I think Doug's moved it.
all right, I second.
Okay, I'd like to read it.
Okay.
That would be
read
the
it.
discussion part.
That's the discussion.
Well, there may be discussion, hopefully not.
Yes.
Now, you all have to take 5 copies
Right, but at least it's the same motion with the same
Distribute.
Crossing out to December, saying,
Okay,
can we
and- and we
repeat
just-
it in the May 1st letter?
It didn't continue the conditions of the December 8th letter.
Yeah, it's a new review. I think you're right, just change it to May 1, and then
Okay.
it is what it is. The number of prior reviews by county planning are set forth in the document.
There's a very specific definition, and you want to get into the cemetery law, it's very regulated. We just try to put them on the list as to where they were.
So the only other question I have is on page 2. The fourth whereas, are we on?
Taking our break?
I guess we're
Are we
back.
back?
Okay.
Yeah.
Are we back?
We are
It's in
back.
order.
Okay,
That's all. Can't do that.
okay, go ahead.
Page 2, the fourth whereas from the bottom. Whereas the planning board considered all the comments and information received at the public hearing and provided comprehensive replies to the various comments. I think comprehensive is too strong a word, I'd like that stricken. I don't think they provided comprehensive replies. They may have looked at them, they may have thought of them.
Lengthy?
Just drop comprehensive replies.
Okay. All right, no, that's
We
fine.
put hearings, there was more than one public hearing. Or you don't
Oh,
want to do it.
they only had one public hearing.
Planning board had one, and so did the town board.
But this
Yeah, but
is
this
the
is just
plan.
talking about
that's
the
the
planning,
town-
this is just the planning board, this is just talking about the
Yeah,
planning
just-
board having
sorry.
one.
Planning board had a meeting where they had discussed and provided a bunch of answers to comments that were submitted.
Right.
And submitted a written summary together with all the comments to the town board. I deem that a comprehensive reply. Joe is saying comprehensive is a subjective assessment, and I don't believe it was comprehensive. Okay, take out the word
Okay, what do you believe
comprehensive.
it was?
It was just replies. I just dropped it comprehensive and I'm fine with it, trying to make it simple.
Okay.
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 Stacy, me?
So I guess my final question is, at the end, it says that, where we say that a responsible officer of the town board, we don't have to say who that responsible officer is in this resolution?
You can if you want. It's just a standard form that it's how it reads everywhere, but if you want to say, we specifically authorize Ed to do it,
I think
that's
it's-
fine.
I think it's cleaner that way.
Okay.
You don't mind being authorized to do that?
No, I have no full size, one more will be fine. Just add it to the pile.
Maybe you should work at Target.
So we just wanted to say the town supervisor, the town board is hereby authorized.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they can call you.
Do I get a dog with a Petey? Is it Petey? Is that in the minutes? Any other, from any board member, comments or questions? Going once? Going twice? Okay, we have a motion on the floor, and I suspect with said, we should probably change that motion to include the suggested changes.
Yep, I approve the amendment.
Okay. Sandra approved it.
Did you? Come on, Doug,
What's that, huh?
it's okay if we approve the little amendment?
Absolutely.
Okay, with said amendment. So I guess now we're going to be voting on the motion with the suggested changes in the resolution.
We don't want to put something about Connie's Fire Hall in here.
It's on record. It's on record. We have it on multiple.
I just think it could be another whereas.
Whereas to which, therefore.
I think we're ready to vote.
Okay.
Okay, so who motioned?
Doug,
We already did.
And, okay, and Andrew second, okay, just making sure.
Yep, no worries.
Andrew Benson,
yes.
Katrina Binkowitz,
Yes.
Doug Dake,
Yes.
Joseph Wetmore,
Yes.
Edward Levine.
Yes.
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you. I think a 5-0 sends a very strong message, so, to your point, Chris? Good. Okay. Let's save this moment just for, we have a couple more things.
I'm fine.
You're buying?
Katrina's buying, oh my goodness. Who wants to adjourn? We do have a little business here to do, a little business. One of them is,
What about the motion to schedule a public hearing?
oh, that's a little business.
Oh, is
We
that
have
our
to-
little
I was
business?
trying to get there. I was
Sorry.
trying to get there.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, thank you.
In that you have through your emails once again, this proposal that's come in, you saw the figures. This one would be tweaked a little bit. We had one last year of early retirement. We also have to do local law because it's different this year. We have to do our 30-day period. We have to set the public hearing. And we can do it for our May regular meeting. And what you've seen through the crux of this is that the people can review it, and I think they have, correct me if I'm wrong, Guy, what, is it June? Effective will be July 31st on here, if I'm reading this correctly. 2018 would be the last day of employment, and they have until June 30th, 2018 to make their final decision.
That's what's proposed. What dates you finally set will be determined by the local law and what's adopted. But
We're just proposing a public hearing.
right. Yeah, you're just motioning and setting the public hearing for it so you can get input and debate it and consider it and start the process of adopting a local law.
I just asked why we were setting it at 6:37, which we went through last time, and this seems to be the standard time you set them for. And although we would have had to wait about 3 minutes to start
Debbie
this.
would like it at 6:32.
Whatever time you...
Okay.
I say we do
6:30.
6:30, because
6:30,
otherwise.
well, you got the pledge of
We can
allegiance.
only do
Well, hold on, and we do already have one public hearing scheduled, and
Yes.
I think that one might be set for 6:35.
Is that the?
I think you're right.
Is it
Sewer
for
district
the
number one?
drainage district, yes.
The sewer district.
Sewer district, sorry.
So they have to be sequentially set?
Yes.
Typically, yes.
Traditionally, they are,
Okay.
but you can schedule all of them for a set
Same
time,
time.
as long as you open them within a reasonable amount of time at the notice. Like, you can't schedule it for 6:30 and then just say, well, we're just gonna wait till 2 a.m. and then open it, so ha-ha. But I mean, if you're reasonably prompt and you just take them down, you just can't open it before the time set, that's all.
Right.
One bit of discussion since we're talking about this is that we always seem to open, close, and then wait. And it seems like we do everything else later as opposed to open, close, and then once we have the public hearing, make our decision then. Can we do that for the future? I mean, we're just following this template in the past.
Because we usually wait till the next meeting.
Well, no, what I'm
We
saying
wait
is
till
that,
later on after all the
Oh,
reports and
wait.
everything.
right, you open the public hearing, and then when everybody's had their comments, you close it. But then it's like 10 items later, we
Yeah,
adjust it.
let's make it proximate, please.
Wouldn't it be like that, have we had that discussion, we might as well just
Do the
close, you know what I'm saying?
resolution
Put
right
it- and finalize it right then.
Especially if
the
there's
public
public
hearings
comment,
after
the
the
people
Yes.
can be there
Yes.
to hear our responses and hear the discussion.
And then hear the vote after.
And that's
Yeah.
I mean, if it's, I don't think there's any law written that we can't do that. I think in the past we've done that. I'm sure there's some reason way back when why that was done, but being different boards, you have different leeway.
I think the issue that comes up is how long are we going to discuss the first item to know when to set the second one. So you don't want to get into what Guy's saying is we set the first public hearing at 6:30. We have an hour and a half discussion about it, which this board can do, I understand. And
That doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
no, but if you know, do we
It
have
doesn't matter, you could set them at 6:30 and 6:30.
two and then have a 2-hour discussion and then have the
And
next
then
public
have,
hearing?
yeah.
Guy, would that be counter to the law?
No, again, as long as you get to them in a reasonable amount of time.
What's reasonable?
As long as it's on your agenda and you're
Well,
going down.
what's reasonable is gonna come down to whatever a court says if it's challenged. So my general feeling is that if it's at the same meeting and during the same time frames, in other words, if you schedule it for early evening and you get to it during early evening as opposed to middle of the night, I think you're fine.
Okay.
Once you start crossing something like 2 hours, I think you get into a grayer area. That's just me. Because the idea is fair notice to the public, and if you have people show up at 6:37 thinking they're going to be heard, and you don't get to it till 9:50,
Smell here.
people may have left.
Yes.
And you not only haven't really adhered to the spirit of the open meetings law, but you've actually self-defeated your goal of getting public input. So, you know, ballpark rule of thumb, if it looks like it might be more than 2 hours or an hour and a half, whatever number you think is reasonable as a matter of policy, that's what I would go by.
Sometimes with these two meetings, and I don't want to say working meeting because we try to get stuff done in both these meetings, is that our regular meeting on the third Wednesday, there is already stuff there. You already have 15 items you're looking at, so you're already locked in for an hour usually, or half an hour through all of the discussions, and if you have comments to our planner or to our highway superintendent or whoever, you're already in for a certain set of time. I'd like to maybe in the future, of course, I also like to get things moving forward, is to maybe try to schedule these public hearings for their first meeting, so you have more time to do that. I say a first meeting, but then again, I don't want to get confused either. But you saw the last time, 35 items or 35 things you're going through, and fortunately, well, let's face it, you've got 2 water districts coming up, 5 and 3. Chances are 5, everybody wanted the water. So chances are you're not going to have a spirited debate about that.
Right.
But you may have a spirited debate, especially when there's already one petition going around about number 3. So once again, how do you schedule these? Because you may have 3 minutes of comment, you may have 20 people right there, there's an hour.
But you schedule the one you're pretty sure there's no comment first.
And exactly, you're exactly right. But well, my point is, and I'm open-minded, I want to juggle this, but you want to be courteous to the people that want to be heard. But on the other hand, you don't want to drag this into the morning type of thing. So where do we go with this? So you schedule one at 6:35 and 6:37. Okay, and then people can come in and comment, and then you can close them later. Reasonable time might be 15 or 20 minutes, but if you have something that might be contentious, you might keep going on, and okay. My whole thing is that I try to get a feel for the town where these things are, and maybe schedule one so that you have more, like we did tonight. If there was people here, you had all the time in the world to listen to them. And I think if you have a more relaxed atmosphere, no matter how contentious it may be in their minds, you at least try to be respectful. So in the future, I'll try to do that so it won't be unusual to have a public hearing at our first meeting. To do that once again, breaking tradition, where it used to be when we had a working meeting only, and then rules, and this one, I think we'd rather have just 2 regular meetings and do it that way. So I don't know if that's answered anybody's question and given any guidance, but I think for now, to set the public hearing, our second one, we have one at 6:35, is it? So we set the second one at 6:37.
That's fine.
And we can adjust the agenda how we see fit. Most of these reports are already produced so they can be read. But on the other hand, the 3 people that want to expound or we have questions for, we also want to, so we'll massage and see what seems to be the best fit for what the town board wants.
I think it's really important that we try to, as best we can, have the discussion happen with the public comment, so the people can stay, listen to the comment, and move on.
Yeah, I think-
Personally?
Yeah, because, yeah, we don't need to stretch their evening out. We're stuck here doing our job, but they should hear responses to what their concerns are.
And I totally agree. Personally, open, close, discuss, vote. So we'll work on that a little bit. I'll
I know
massage
it's
that.
I know it's a juggling thing, and you can't always get it right, because
But I really think if you start setting the public hearings for the first Wednesday, you have tremendous more flexibility because you avoid those agenda items already. And I think that's where 2 meetings will be much more beneficial also, as long as we still take the attitude that these are both meetings, not one working meeting, because I want everybody to maintain the intensity, because we got a lot more stuff going on here to do that. And the pitfall for a lot of them are, okay, here's the meeting, we'll work on it, we got plenty of time, and then we'll go ahead. And a lot of times, not with this board, but a lot of boards, the tendency is you now have stretched and you now are doing twice as much time for half the work. So, like I said, I didn't say this board. Okay?
I heard that.
Yes. So we will, I'd like to make a motion for 6:37.
Okay?
Do I have a second?
Sure.
Okay. Joe seconds it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Okay. Third one, or number 7 actually, is the reserve policy. You saw in the email the fact that all the reserve accounts have to have something deposited every year into them. Otherwise, what happens is that we get a $5 fee per month. We also discussed the fact that there's some of the things we're doing this year, allocation of money, whether it be for equipment. My attitude is that why would you put money in reserve if you're already using that money right there? Same thing also happened with the trail. We talked about the 15 allocation for that, the $15,000. There is the proposal to do a trail. You want a little information on that about South Point?
The loop was originally a number 2 gravel, I believe, fairly coarse, and we're trying to make Salt Point more handicap accessible, and we have had some complaints about the instability of the loop trail, so I believe Cricket said that stone dust would be a very reasonable cost. They could apply it, and it would have long-lasting.
It's actually limestone dust.
Is it limestone
And
dust?
so when you put it down, you wet it, it's like concrete.
Like concrete,
And you roll it.
and
You
you
gotta
roll
roll
it,
it. You
and you
gotta
can
roll it.
re-roll it if it gets, and we could use non-toxic means to keep weeds out.
What's the lifespan on that kind of sidewalk?
Till somebody
If
digs
it's
at it
maintained,
for a long
quite
time.
long.
Okay.
It
Yeah.
works out pretty well. It's not,
It's like concrete when they get it
it's-
wet enough.
yeah, but it's still, you can still pick it apart with a shovel.
Yeah.
It would also position us probably for maybe Blue Way Trail grants, because we're handicap accessible, to apply for other things as far as.
Well, you probably
development.
should be, with the ADA requirements, you
Yeah.
should be required to do it anyway.
Okay. Yeah.
Does it let the water percolate through it, or is it?
It does and it doesn't.
It'll be
I mean,
narrow.
It's more permeable than blacktop or concrete,
Okay.
but, and yet it still sheds water.
It's not gonna be a super wide swath, 2 people passing easily.
I think you want the wheelchair width and a person walking next to it. I think that's the minimum you want to be talking about, but I'm sure there's an ADA.
There is an ADA requirement in terms of width, it has to be at least 40 inches, and then it's every 35 feet, you have to have a landing so they can pass each other. I just make it, if you make it 5 feet wide the whole way, that's your minimum.
Okay.
You can make it a little wider
And I
if you
think
want
he
to
was
get a
thinking
truck on
about
it or
6
something
foot,
too.
about 6 foot.
Is this the walking path along the lake shore or the driving path?
What was a driving path, that is now a walking path. That's
It goes
the
up to-
point.
it goes
It
down-
goes along the
The
lake
full
shore.
loop out to the end, the west end, where
And
the
up Salmon
Osprey
Creek.
are.
Right, but not including the part where the cars go from the entryway to. the
Correct. It's
picnic
just the
area.
walking
And
area.
not the mowed paths that are going back and forth through the woods.
Correct. It's just the loop. It will have a side trail, so you can get down to the beach very close. It will bump out probably at the bench where the library is, and then it will be just the regular width on a loop.
One of the things is, once again, background information, because it is a lease from the DEC, we have to be very careful about permanent, okay, permanent things. One of the things that was brought up many years ago was to put little cabins over there for camping. We can't do that because it's a permanent structure. even if you can put them on skids, they won't allow that. So we have to be delicate here on how we do this. This falls, I believe, into that category of being not permanent. And yet it also is the least amount, I believe, least amount of maintenance for it. And it's still a hard surface so that you can have wheelchairs on it. So this is about the best balance we can do. The fact that the highway guys are willing to do this, with their machines and their rollers, I mean, you've just probably seen them, they're rolling the ball fields down, you know, the bumps out with the big rollers, they also use it for that same thing. The main thing, though, is that, getting back to the major point of this discussion, is that $15,000 was allocated for the trailway. We're implementing. If you're implementing, which I'm all in favor of, okay, let's implement, but then take that balance and put that into reserve. So we already started to use some of that money that you had intended for purposes. We found purposes for it, which is what reserve money is for. That's what taxpayers want. So that's the other thing, is that the other three accounts, or the other two accounts, will have some in it that we talked about. But those three are dormant. The technology, Patrick is working on the computers and also on the phone system. That might go over what was allowed for technology. Let's wait and see what that balance is at the end of the year, and whatever that difference is, that gets dumped back into the reserve also. So that was my suggestion, to do that, because as we continue to monitor these things, we found out that, like I said, it's a $5 fee. So if people are comfortable with that, we have to have a resolution for that, so we have a record of it, and that'll be at our next meeting to go and do that. But it's a heads up to everybody. So if we're comfortable with that, we'll put that on our agenda. One more thing.
The resolution is just for this year, or is it an ongoing?
No, each year you have to show where the allocation of money goes.
So you're just talking about this year?
That's right.
Correct.
You're taking fund and you put it into reserve, so you have to, so yes, you have to, it has to be board approval to do that.
So how much of the 15K are you talking about using for the limestone?
Well, we have estimated 6,000 for that, and then the balance of 9,000 will go into that reserve, so it'll be up to 24,000 for the trail. I think it's the park. Is it Parkway Trailway? Park paths and Trailway. I forget the proper.
Technical.
But the official.
And that limestone's gonna go on to where the wheelchair people are getting out of their vehicles?
Yes, I asked that it be extended into the handicap parking area.
And it's not gonna be a problem, people driving back and forth on it?
No.
I don't know about this material.
There's not a lot of driving in the handicap area. People are being very good about only parking there.
Yeah.
So
I like
the
the
wear and
idea.
tear is pretty low.
I like the idea of making it more handicap accessible. There's not enough parks that are available for people to go out and see nature.
I think this is probably about the best way we can do it for everybody and still comply with our lease.
Yeah.
So that's where we are with that one. I will give you some information real quick. I do want to get out here by 8:30. Is the sewer. Once again, okay, our public hearing for that. Village of Cuba Heights, and correct me if I get any of this wrong, Michael. When we met with the Big Six, which is the city and town of Ithaca, town of Dryden, village and town of Lansing, and Village of Cuba Heights, about the sewer concerns. And one of the things that came up in our discussion, talking to Brent Cross, was that the Village of Cuba Heights hasn't quite got the lead agency. They haven't decided on for the map plan report and for the formation of the sewer district yet. So I want them to, of course, they meet on the 23rd of this month.
Yeah. I guess technically what happens is Brent has given us some feedback and comments on the initial map plan report, but he can't officially give us any comments until he's authorized by the Cuba Heights Board. So basically, as Ed's trying to say, you've scheduled the public hearing just before their meeting. So if we can probably get to the adoption phase of it maybe at the next meeting afterwards.
So once again, we try to get these things done, and now I have to keep it open another month. I mean, but once again, information comes across my desk, and we have to address it, also making our partners in this, which is the Village of Cuba Heights, comfortable, considering they're allowing us to go into their system.
Well, we could at this meeting reschedule that public hearing to the following meeting.
There's a variety of different ways we can do this.
You can
also
hold
keep
the
it
public
open.
hearing as you've scheduled, and you just don't take action on it until the next meeting.
We can keep it open, which means you basically will have comments for 2 periods. We also can have it on the 16th and then is it June 1st is it the first Wednesday? I forgot, I don't have the calendar in front of me. Whatever that is, that first Wednesday, we can actually pass it then. So it doesn't have to be the second Wednesday in June. So there's a variety of ways that you can do this to accommodate the
June 6th.
June 6th.
June 6th, which we can probably address it then.
So the decision can't be made before June 6th.
We can make it, but
You can make it
I'm
subject.
concerned about irritating our partners, which is Cuba Heights, which is like, you take as much time as you want on this, and when you're comfortable, get back to us.
I think in that spirit, why don't we move the public hearing to June 6th to say, we're going to wait and hear from you before we even schedule our public hearing, so.
Didn't we already?
We've already made
It's already after.
We've already scheduled, we've already been advertised. That's the other part, is that we're,
Okay.
this information wasn't made, I wasn't aware of it until Monday.
Mhm.
So it's like, it was like one of those OMG moments, okay.
Okay.
So we'll make it work, because in all fairness, there really isn't a crunch to get this done this month, because there still has time.
Mhm.
But we don't want to just also drag it on, because we got so close to getting this thing done, it would be nice. So it was a little bit disappointing, but I also have to respect.
I want to have good relations with our neighbors. and That's important.
This is a long-term relationship that is going to, yes.
Yeah, I just have your public hearing, take your input and comments, and if you do leave it open, Cuba Heights can be part of the groups that comment. They're an involved agency, so they can comment regardless of whether there's a public hearing. And if for some reason the comments, including from Cuba Heights, are important enough to cause a change to the plan, you can always have another public hearing. There's I'm not in favor of scheduling an excess of them, but there are some very specific timing rules in district formation about public hearings. So you could do whatever you want, but moving to change the public hearing today doesn't matter because you can't advertise it. It has to be noticed not less than 10 nor more than 20 days before the public hearing. So you got plenty of time if you're going to move it.
Yeah, but we've already gone to the expense of public.
Oh, yeah,
the
it's
first
been-
one.
Right, so I get the input. If you have a second one, all the better.
And then we can make that decision at our June meeting.
Yeah, depending on the input you get, yes.
And this won't irritate Cuba Heights. They already know that we've scheduled a public hearing and they're okay with that?
They are, but we're also told them that we're on your schedule.
Yeah.
We're on their schedule.
Yeah.
When you're comfortable
Just
enough,
communicate.
As long as they're
contact us.
comfortable with that approach, I'm okay with
And
that.
we will send out an email to Brent saying, look, we are going to have the open hearing, but we're not going to make any decision until the village of you guys has had plenty of time to look this over so they're comfortable with it.
And Brent's already offered to give us some informal comments. It's just that he can't officially comment until he's authorized by the village to do it.
I understand.
That's, and again, we're trying to play nice with everyone.
Well, they've been very cooperative with us. I mean, they've been very good to us in all fairness. And they have a 40-year-old system that they're trying to work on. And the Ithaca system also is a little bit older and is under stress. So there'll be a lot of discussions about sewer in the future as far as that goes. Yes, Dan, I know it's a crappy situation, but we have to do the best we can. And that's what your benefit. My gift to you. Is there anything else we can discuss tonight? I'm 5 minutes early.
No.
Would you like to make a motion to?
You don't need a motion.
We're just- We are going to
We're done.
adjourn.
We're done, and
We're
Well,
going home.
let me just make a very, very brief comment. But I just
we're
You're
done.
sorry.
We're down the road, bud.
Go ahead.
Go.
I'm just going to say, in my quick analysis, we've had at least 65 people involved in the comprehensive plan committee. And I just think it's appropriate to thank everyone for their input, their process, participation between the comprehensive plan committee, planning board members, town board members, those that are in and those that are out. More importantly, I think my Joe Shepard, my partner in business, he did a lot of wordsmithing to try to keep all of those different things together and up to date. Again, I've been trying to lately, try to fill in the gaps because he's busy now. But I just want to thank everyone for their participation in this process because it's
Dan, can we have an official thank you in the Lansing Star about that?
Do you want somebody to craft that?
Mike Long would be happy to do that.
Mike, go ahead and thank